Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai tells a story of a group of travelers on a boat. One person took a drill and began to drill a hole beneath himself. The other travelers asked, "Why are you doing this?" The person replies, "Why are you concerned about it? Am I not drilling under my place?" They replied, "But you will flood the boat for all of us." We are, quote unquote, travelers, and maybe on this boat together. Sometimes we are the ones that are drilling the holes, and sometimes we are the ones that turn to other people and say, "Stop drilling those holes, you will drown all of us." This Shabbat, our Reformed Jewish movement has designated it as Shabbat Tzedakah, which is a Shabbat of justice or of equity. We commemorate this Shabbat by reminding ourselves of the work we have done and the work that we must do to create a just world from which we can all benefit. This Shabbat is named Shabbat Tzedakah in honor of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. It celebrates his fight against racism, his powerful voice, and his contribution to the civil rights movement. Dr. King stood firmly against any kind of hatred and chose to promote love over hatred. Similarly to the story of the collective boat told by the rabbis of the old, Dr. King believed that injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere, as he famously stated. He propounded that we are all interconnected in this world, that if something happens or affects one person or one group of people, it can indirectly and sometimes really directly affect others or all of us. As a Jew and as a rabbi, the images of rabbis holding Torahs and marching alongside Dr. King in Selma in 1965 resonates deeply with me on this Shabbat. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the famous rabbis who marched with Dr. King, reminded us that sometimes it is necessary to pray with our feet. I recently learned that our very own Rabbi Axelrod from Betham was one of the people of the rabbis who marched down in Selma in Montgomery to protest against for the voting rights of African Americans in the Jim Crow South. This year's commemoration of Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy coincides with the presidential inauguration on Monday the 20th. And I understand that for most people, it's mixed emotions and mixed feelings. Some are filled with anticipation, and others are filled with fear and dread and of fear of the uncertainty of what will come. Nevertheless, I want to remind us that our responsibility is to work hard, to work towards making sure that all policies of the government or structures of the government are for the benefit of all of us and not just a select few. This is how we honor Dr. King. Today also marks over 450 days that we've been praying and working towards the release of the hostages taken on October 7th. Noting also that we have been praying for peace and an end to the war and suffering in the Middle East even before the events, the horrific attack on Israel over a year ago. As of today, in my understanding, the Israeli Security Cabinet has approved a ceasefire and hostage release deal, now awaiting approval from the entire cabinet that is commendably working even on Shabbat, because we understand that human life takes precedence over observing Shabbat. Mediators and many of us hope that this marks the first step towards ending the war between Israel and Hamas, which began after Hamas' horrific attack on Israel on October 7th. And this attack resulted into the death of approximately 1,200 Israelis and non-Israeli soldiers, civilians and citizens, and 250 individuals taken hostage into Gaza. The ensuing war has caused widespread devastation as well, leading to the death of thousands of people, of Palestinians in Gaza, many of whom are innocent, and also Israeli soldiers who defend our people, losing their lives. If approved by the entire cabinet, which seems more likely now as of today, we can expect the release of 33 hostages over the next 6 weeks, starting this Sunday. This release will occur in exchange of Hamas's demands for releasing hundreds of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel, some of whom the Israeli officials say are war criminals and terrorists. Currently, Israeli officials report that there are about 100 hostages that are still both alive and dead, we did not exactly know, that are still in captive under Hamas in Gaza. As we anxiously wait for their release, we also struggle really to comprehend what the families of the hostages must be enduring at this moment. Daniel Lifshitz, whose grandfather, 84 years old, one of the approximately 100 hostages held in Gaza and among the first people to be released, expressed his feelings in the New York Times earlier today. He said, "My stomach is turning and my heart feels shattered. But this is what we have been waiting for," he added. "It is impossible to prepare for both a celebration and a funeral simultaneously, because they do not know what to expect." Mr. Zessa, whose family hosted Eden Alexander as a lone soldier in Israel and has been a strong advocate for him, for his release, also expressed skeptically in the New York Times that, "I know they are extremists, but I hope that the Prime Minister would not let this take charge." Some displaced Palestinians also hope the deal will come to fruition. One Reham Sheikh Al-Eid said, "I hope it will happen so that we'll be able to cook in our homes and make whatever food we want without having to go to soup kitchens and exhaust ourselves for 3 or 4 hours to get food, sometimes not even making it home." I do believe, and I hope you do too, that there are many, many more of these stories and emotions like this, including from the soldiers and their families in Israel. It is really, for me, it's easy to understand that there's a deep yearning for stability, for peace, and basic humanity and hope for everybody in the Middle East, in Israel, and its neighbors. This Shabbat, too, we start the reading of our book of Exodus, Shemot, which we read following the book of Genesis. In this book of Exodus, we see that a small family of Jacob becomes the nation of Israel. The Torah turns to the promised land in this book, which is gained through these new stories of Exodus, of revelation, and of freedom. In this week's Torah portion, Parashah, we also see and learn of the epic scene of the burning bush. We know that Moses, one of our greatest leaders, starts out his leadership journey humbly and hesitantly. And thinking of the burning bush, our world is burning right now, literally. As Jews, we could have chosen a different story as our central narrative, but the Jewish people were born through this Exodus story, the struggle for freedom. It is a story we retell every year on our Pesach Seders when we sit around and on a Pesach Seder. The book of Exodus reminds us of our ongoing struggles for liberation, for human rights, and the dignity of every individual. In it, we witness the suffering and enslavement of the Israelites, but we also are inspired by God's deliverance of the people, Moses' leadership, and our own resilience. Moses took into his own time and hands and recognized the burning bush, which others may have passed without noticing. This moment led to a significant movement organized by Moses with the slogan, "Let my people go," a movement that has inspired future prophets, freedom fighters, and activists of all generations. John Coffey, the author of Exodus and Liberation, writes, "Exodus has been used as a key text for the abolitionists, black preachers, and activists powerfully informing protest debates over slavery in America. The leaders of slave revolts aimed to replicate the Exodus. The journey from the southern states to the northern states was envisioned as a flight from Egypt. Harriet Tubman, the conductor on the Underground Railroad, was celebrated as Black Moses. Spirituals such as Go Down Moses described America during slavery as Egypt land and told the old Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Exodus is our story, our own story that inspires us of resilience, that inspires us to treat others, especially the strangers and the most vulnerable among us, with fairly and justly, because we do understand what it means to be strangers, and because this is what the God of Revelation, our God, demands of us. The narrative of Exodus was also common in Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches and writing. He saw himself as in the role of Moses fighting for his people against Pharaoh of the time, the Jim Crow laws of the South. Our tradition demands us that we imagine ourselves as though each of us were in Egypt. There we can treat the strangers living among us with empathy, because we too, as Jews, understand what it means to be a stranger and what it means to suffer, but we also feel what it means to be liberated. So as we hold our fingers crossed for the release of the hostages, we pray for an end to suffering for all, including the Palestinian people. When we listen to the pleas of both Israelis and Palestinian communities for peace and safety, and when we reflect on Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, we genuinely recognize that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are only truly free if everybody is free. And as our prophets remind us, justice, justice shall you pursue. This has become our life's mission. And may we celebrate justice soon. Shabbat Shalom. We turn now in the